All right, Shalom. I want to give all praises, honor, and glory due to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakah Kwadash. Double honors to the apostles of GMS, and Shalom to you brothers pushing this truth in sincerity. I'm Karatazah Bah, back on another show. In this show, I'm going to entitle Paul, a prisoner of the Lord. All right, because some of the epistles, Paul, he calls himself a prisoner of, Yahweh Shai, the Messiah, okay? And those, and these epistles where he mentioned himself being a prisoner of Yahweh Shai, Paul was actually in prison, okay? A few of these epistles that we read, he was actually in prison when he wrote them. As in, we hear in the book of Philemon, I know the book of Colossians, Ephesians. All right, so Paul was a actual prisoner in Rome. So for pretty much, preaching the gospel. Okay, he was physically in prison, but he calls himself a prisoner in Yahweh Shai while he was in prison. Okay, but let's read a few of them scriptures. So this is Philemon, chapter 1, verse 1. It says, Paul, a prisoner of Yahweh Shai Mashiach, and Timothy, our brother, unto Philemon, our dearly beloved and fellow laborer. Let's go to Ephesians. The book of Ephesians, chapter 3. Book of Ephesians, chapter 3, verse 1. For this cause I, Paul, the prisoner of Yahweh Shai Mashiach, for the Gentiles. Let's go to Ephesians 4 and 1. And reads, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that ye walk worthily of the vocation wherewith you are called. Right. So in these epistles, Paul, he calls himself the prisoner of Yahweh Shai Mashiach. Okay. So pretty much when Paul was saying that, Paul was referring to him, being an actual prisoner. Okay. So though Paul was a prisoner, under Roman authority, for pretty much preaching the gospel. But Paul was saying that he was a prisoner of Yahweh Shai. So though he was a physical prisoner under the Romans, that imprisonment was from the Lord, he was saying, okay? That imprisonment that he was going through was from Yahweh Shai. Okay? So Paul understood that him being in prison for, suffering imprisonment for him, preaching Yahweh Shai and the gospel and bringing it to the Gentiles and Israelite foreigners, etc. And all the things he suffered for preaching the gospel, and part of that suffering was being in prison. Okay, but he understood that imprisonment that he was going through was the will of the Lord. All right, so that's what Paul was acknowledging. That's what Paul was acknowledging when he called himself a prisoner of Yahweh Shai Mashiach. Let's go to the book of Acts, chapter 9. The book of Acts, chapter 9. And this is when Yahweh, before his name was Paul, he was going by Saul, okay? And this is when Yahweh Shai came into him. Let's go to... Okay, so this was when Yahweh Shai was speaking to Ananias. This is Acts chapter 9, verse 10. And there was a certain disciple at Damascus named Ananias, and to him said the Lord in a vision, Ananias. And he said, Behold, I am here, Lord. And the Lord said unto him, Arise, and go into the street which is called Straight, and inquire in the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus. For behold, he prayeth. And he seen in a vision a man named Ananias coming in and putting his hand on him that he might receive his sight. And you read up early in the chapter, after Saul's encounter with Yahushua, the flash of light that, blinded him for, I believe, 3 days. And Ananias was supposed to come to him, to give him his sight back. All right. Verse 13, then Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard by many of this man how much evil he hath done to thy saints at Jerusalem. Now, before Paul was a believer, he was persecuting the church, okay? He was persecuting the believers in Yahushua, putting them in prison and having them put to death, all right? And here he have authority from the chief priest to bind all that call on thy name. But the Lord said unto him, Go thy way, for he is a chosen vessel unto me. Yeah, so Yahushua told Ananias that Saul, which name would be later Paul, is a chosen vessel unto the Lord, because Paul was a chosen vessel to preach the gospel unto the Gentiles, which are the Israelite foreigners. And it says to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel. Right. So the Gentiles, kings, and children of Israel, this is all referring to the Israelite foreigners of Israel. Okay. This is what you call a hendiatrist. A three words used by means of one meaning. Okay. So verse 16, it reads, For I will shew him how great things he must suffer for my name's sake. Right. So Yahushua said, look, I will shew him great things he must suffer for his name's sake. All right. So Paul had to preach the gospel, and he was going to suffer great persecution. All right. And part of that great suffering was him going through, being in prison for, preaching the gospel. Just as he, before he was in the faith, he was a part of putting the believers in Yahushua into prison and persecuting them unto death. All right. So a part of Paul's suffering was, him actually being in prison. Okay. So when Paul was saying that, him being a prisoner of Yahushua, he was acknowledging that Paul was acknowledging that, that was pretty much a part of his suffering. Okay. His lot that he had to go through for believing on Yahushua and doing the work of the Lord. And part of that tribulation and persecution he was going to have to suffer being in prison. All right. Let's go to the book of Luke, chapter 21, Luke chapter 21, verse 12. And it reads, But behold, all these, they shall lay, Salakia, let's read it again. It's Luke 21 and 12. But before all these, they shall lay hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and into prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. Yeah, so Yahushua, was telling the disciples the events that was going to take place in the end. Okay. And part of the tribulations that's going to come upon the world is the persecution for the believers that believe in Yahushua's name. Okay, and it happened back then. When you read, the book of Acts, the apostles were put into prisons for preaching the gospel, for preaching the name of Yahushua. Okay, so just as the apostles went through that imprisonments and sufferings back then, yeah, it happened back then, but it's gonna happen in these times also. Okay, because the times are gonna come where the believers in Yahushua, that's gonna be a part of their persecution. It's gonna be part of their lot is to actually be in prisons. And we know in the times to come, when Esau, fully implements his new order, the MOTB. All right, we enter in the time of martial law. Pretty much the country being on lockdown. People are gonna, people who believe in any kind of religion, they're gonna be, looked at as terrorists and put into, captivity, pretty much to say. All right, but ultimately, that persecution is gonna come upon the believers in Yahushua. All right, the ones who call themselves Israelites and calling on the name of Yahweh and Yahushua. All right, so just as it happened back then with the apostles, and mainly the apostle Paul, okay, him being the prisoner of Yahushua, and that's gonna happen to the believers in these times also, as it did back then. So I read it again. It says, "But before all these, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up unto the synagogues, Slakia, and unto prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake." Right. So being put in prisons for preaching the gospel, that's a part of the sufferings. That's a part of the tribulation. That's a part of the persecution that believers is gonna have to go through, as the apostles went through it, as Paul himself went through it. Okay, so we gotta understand that imprisonment, that ultimately comes from Yahweh Yahushua. Okay, that's like the part of the test from Yahweh Yahushua. Okay, let's get that Revelations chapter. I believe the second chapter, third chapter. I believe the second chapter. Okay, second chapter is Revelations 2 and 10. Revelations 2 and 10 is Yahweh Shah speaking, and it reads, "Fear none of these things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison." Right, so it says, "Fear none of these things that thou shalt suffer. The devil shall cast some of you into prisons." Okay, and that's going to happen in the times to come. So Yahweh Shah is letting us know, look, in these last days, the believers in Yahushua, they're going to be put in the prisons. All right, Esau is going to be, gathering the believers, putting them into concentration camps. The ones that deny the MOTB. So they're going to be a lot of the believers are going to be put into actual prisons in these times to come for their test of faith. And it says that ye may be tried. So this is a test, a part of the test, part of the battle. And this walk of faith. So it says that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. And 10 days doesn't actually mean 10 days, but 10 just means completion. All right. So however long you have to be put into prison for your test of faith, okay? And you have to maintain your faith. So it says, be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. Yeah, so be thou faithful unto death, okay? This is what Yahweh Shah is saying. So if you're put into prison, you keep your faith. Don't let your faith go, okay? Hey, because, that time they might tell you, look, you denounce what you believe in, okay, to lighten your sentence or to let you go. And if you don't denounce it, we're going to, kill you. So you got to maintain that faith, because that's ultimately a test from Yahweh Yahweh Shah. So it says, be thou faithful unto death, and I should give you a crown of life. Okay, which is, salvation at the end. Receiving the kingdom, being resurrected unto salvation. All right. Because all of this, everything that we got to go through is all a part of the sufferings of the Lord. Okay. And it all comes from the Most High. All right. It all comes from Yahweh Yahweh Shah. So, imprisonment for the faith is the actual thing that's going to happen. All right. As it happened back then. And Paul mentioned him being a prisoner of Yahweh Shah, because he acknowledging that, though he was in prison under the Romans, the actual Romans, that imprisonment was ultimately from the Lord that he had to go through, for believing in the Lord and for doing the Lord's will. Okay. So, with that, hope your brothers learn something. I want to say all praises, honor, and glory due to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shah, Bahashem, Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles of GMS, and shalom to the elect. Shalom.